So I would like to welcome everybody here this evening, and we are very pleased to welcome today Swami Mahayogananda, a monk from the Ramakrishna Monastery in Trabuco Canyon, California. Swami joined the order in 1997 and has been serving at its Hollywood branch, the Vedanta Society of Southern California, since 2013. From 2002 until 2008, he stayed in India, first at the Ramakrishna headquarters in Belgaum, West Bengal, and then at Narottam Nagar, Arunachal Pradesh, Advaita Ashrama, Kolkata, and Advaita Ashrama, Mayavati. He returned to the United States in 2008, where he served at the Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C., and since 2013 has been serving at the Vedanta Society of Southern California. He is a popular guest speaker and has a very impressive selection of wonderful talks on YouTube. The subject of his talk today is Vedanta and the near-death experience. Swamiji, welcome.
So let's start. And I think we'll start with the first near-death experience that comes to my mind when thinking about Vedanta and our tradition, which is Nachiketa's near-death experience when he went to visit Yama, the god of death. And he asks this question, which really all of us have, this kind of doubt, which is, Ye yam prete vichikitsa manushye asti tyeke naimasti chaike tad vidvan anushishtaspayaham varanamesha parastritiya. As we remember, Yama had granted him 3 boons. And so he says, the third boon that I want to know is, well, when a person dies, some people say he exists. Some people say he is not. His existence comes to an end. This doubt, I want to know about this. Can you teach me about this? And of course, the rest of the Upanishad is Yama's answer to this question, dispelling Nachiketa's doubt and all of our doubts about what happens at death. Do we die? When we die, do we cease to exist or not? And the resounding reply is, we exist. Our true nature is existence. So there's no question of ceasing to exist. And his thrilling and such poetic verses of the Upanishad. Let me chant one. Najayate mriyate va vipaschinnayam kutaschinna babhuva kaschit. Ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. Of course, we hear the same verse practically in the Gita. The self, the knowing self is not born, it does not die. It has not come from anything, and nothing comes from it. It is birthless, eternal, everlasting, and ancient. It is not killed when the body is killed. So these kind of verses, they go a long way towards dispelling, certainly dispelling the doubt of Nachiketa and dispelling our doubt. However, at the same time, we could say that doubt dies hard. And especially living in these times when science is such a big factor in life, and perhaps the majority of scientists are hardcore materialists. So living in this age of materialism, we do doubt. The scriptures say so, but still we doubt. Is it really true? Or is death just the end of everything? So the saints and sages, of course, corroborate these teachings of Yama and the Upanishads. And in recent times, Sri Ramakrishna's life itself is a kind of an antidote to doubt. His life enables us to see God face to face, says Gandhiji. And when we get doubts, we can think, well, Sri Ramakrishna saw God. He showed God to Swami Vivekananda. He showed God to so many people. God must exist, yes. So it's a wonderful his life and teachings are a wonderful antidote to doubt. Now, we're getting new support for the spiritual position that our true nature does not die, that our true nature is spiritual, that our true nature is consciousness, from an unexpected quarter. And this is this phenomenon of the near-death experience and some associated phenomena like spiritual out-of-body experiences and remembrances of past lives and after-death communication experiences, things like that. So today we'll be looking at the near-death experience. What is the near-death experience? I think most of you know, and I heard a question at the beginning, have I experienced one? Let me settle that at first. I have not experienced one myself, but I'm fascinated by them, and I have read a lot about them, and I've also spoken with a lot of people who have had them. So what is the phenomenon? People who die on operating tables, in car wrecks, in ambulances going from car wreck scenes and other accidents, in emergency rooms, in swimming pools, so many places, so many ways to die. And then they die, and then they are resuscitated. And sometimes such people report having remarkable experiences outside of their bodies, being conscious during the times of their death, of being, as I said, outside their bodies, meeting deceased relatives, experiencing tremendous peace and love, and sometimes having remarkably transcendent, transformative, profoundly spiritual experiences. So do these experiences that are reported by near-death experiencers, do they tally with the ideas and ideals of Vedanta? I feel that they do. They confirm them, they validate them, and they add to our understanding. So it's a very valuable area of study. And historically, it looks like people have been having these kinds of experiences for millennia. There are some reports scattered in the literature, but it's only recently that they've become widely acknowledged and widely known. And that started in 1975 with Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, in which he coins the term near-death experience, which now we call NDE, near-death experience. And a lot of information has been coming out since then. And with so many books coming out, websites, the materialist position is beginning to crumble a little, I feel. So we can see that this field, this area of study, is now being taken up by some scientists, particularly medical doctors who have encountered it in their practices. They find people telling them about their experiences and have started studying it in a systematic way. And it's forming an interesting intersection between religion and science, or between spirituality and science. And I'd like to touch briefly on the particular field of medicine, which has a lot to do with more and more near-death experience reports coming up, and that is resuscitation medicine. This is a fairly new field of medicine. The practice of CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, where they do the chest compressions and then the electric paddles to shock the heart away. This was started only in the 1960s. Before that, there was no CPR. So this science of resuscitating people who have died or are dying has made tremendous progress since the 1960s. And it is now possible to resuscitate people who have died minutes or sometimes even hours after dying, especially if the body is cold, and bring them back to life, which is also why the current practice in major hospitals is to chill the bodies of cardiac arrest patients. Their chances of recovery are much better when their bodies are cooled down. So as doctors have begun finding these ways of resuscitating people, they've been hearing from their patients, well, I had this amazing experience. I met my grandfather and whatever. And most doctors tragically dismiss these reports as hallucinations, as dreams, as imagination, as the death throes of an oxygen-starved brain. So that's one reason why many people who have these experiences don't speak about them much. Why? Because they're met with skepticism, incredulity, they're labeled crazy, so they keep quiet. We'll address a little later this dying brain theory. But the flood of reports is growing so large now that it's breaking the taboo in scientific circles on discussing the phenomenon, at least to a certain extent. And even Moody's book, for instance, was an international bestseller, 13 million copies, translated into a dozen languages. Dr. Moody interviewed hundreds of people who had reported these near-death experiences, and he found they had a number of common factors. So each experience was unique in itself, unique still. They had a number of similar elements. Moody identified 9 of them. And I'd like to go over those similar elements that are found commonly in the near-death experiences. I'm going to use the list developed by Dr. Jeffrey Long, not our Dr. Jeffrey Long, but Dr. Jeffrey Long, who is a radiation oncologist in Louisiana. And he has developed the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation and has taken questionnaires of thousands and thousands of people who have had near-death experiences. So he's able to, with modern computers and all that, data analysis, he's able to analyze these experiences and come up with some data. So what this is how the scientific study is mostly proceeding through this, moving from anecdotal to statistical. It's a little difficult to test near-death experiences. Ordinarily, we'd say, okay, people are dying and you resuscitate them and they have an experience. Well, we'll kill some people and then resuscitate them and see if they had an experience. We can't do that, obviously, but we can interview people who have been resuscitated and take their experiences down. So what typically happens? 12 main categories, and these are across cultures, across religions, among old people, and also even among the very young. A person who dies or very nearly dies from cardiac arrest, drug allergy, disease, drowning, car accident, whatever it may be, gunshot. One or more of these elements. First, out-of-body experience. They become separated from their body. Oftentimes, they may see their body below them. 75% of people report having this kind of separation from their body. Number 2, heightened senses, increased mental clarity, intense colors, experiencing intense colors or sounds, hearing at a distance, feeling the emotions of others. 75% of experiences report having more consciousness, more alertness than normal, which is one reason why we reject the materialist position of, or why the researchers reject the materialist position of oxygen-starved brain, because an oxygen-starved brain is generally less conscious, less alert than usual. Number 3, intense and generally positive emotions or feelings of peace, love, and joy. Number 4, passing through a tunnel. This is I guess the stereotype of the near-death experience. You pass through a tunnel to the light at the other side of the tunnel. Actually, only about 30% of people experiencing near-death experience pass through a tunnel. It's a significant element, but not in the majority. Number 5, encountering a mystical or brilliant light, sometimes described as being of the nature of unconditional and infinite love. Number 6, encountering other beings, either mystical beings, perhaps guides or angels, or deceased relatives or friends, even relatives they did not know they had. Number 7, a sense of altered time or space. Time seems to stop. Number 8, a life review, often in very short time, experiencing the entire life and how all the actions affected others. The life review involves seeing how their actions have affected others. About 20% of experiencers have some kind of life review. Number 9, encountering unworldly or heavenly realms. Number 10, encountering or learning a special kind of knowledge, like the nature of God, or the purpose of life, past incarnations, the remaining work to be done on earth in the rest of one's life. Number 11, encountering a boundary or a barrier, a point of no return, and the experiencer realizes that if they cross this barrier, there's no coming back. And often being told so, if you cross this, you can't go back. And number 12, a return to the body. This is the one that's common to all of them, the return to the body. Since we can't hear about their experience if they don't return to the body. So all of them return to the body, but sometimes this is voluntary and sometimes also involuntary. People who are not willing to return to the body, they're in so much joy and so much peace. They have no interest in returning to the body, and yet they're forced to do so. So these are the 12 elements of a near-death experience that Dr. Jeffrey Long outlines. And I'd like to examine at least some of these in greater detail, mainly by reading some actual reports of experiences. I would like to add that another common element to most near-death experiences is the after effects. They're transformative. People's lives are transformed by these experiences, generally in very positive ways. And they're ineffable. They're very difficult to talk about. It's very hard to describe what happens, to put words to the experience. How do you talk about time standing still? How do you talk about being simultaneously aware of the thoughts and feelings of everybody in the room? I would also just mention here, and we won't go into this today, but there are a few people who experience disturbing or upsetting things. They have frightening experiences, sometimes called hellish experiences, where they go not to a heavenly realm, but a hellish realm. These are generally much fewer, but we acknowledge that this does happen sometimes. So let's talk a little bit about this first element, the out-of-body experience. We emphasize again and again in Vedanta, we are not our bodies, and we are not our minds, of course, but we are not our bodies. This is one of the main things. We are not the body, and yet we don't know it. We don't experience it. And our language also reflects it. What do we say? How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Or I'm sick today. Or I'm feeling cold. I'm hungry. Am I hungry? I cannot be hungry. My nature is infinite consciousness. How can I be hungry? Body is hungry. How old are you? Well, I'm 54 years old. Really? You are unborn, undying. How can you be 54 years old? It's the body which is 54 years old, but we talk like that. We say, I am 54 years old. So this is how our language reflects our inner conviction. And though we like to think that we are not bodies, our experience is that we are bodies. Well, in the out-of-body experience of a near-death experience, a person typically finds him or herself floating above their body. and seeing it from above. And when they recognize it, that's a profound experience, and that stays with them. Afterwards, they know that they're not their bodies. Let me read an experience. This is by a man who died of ventricular tachycardia, which is some kind of arrhythmia of the heart when it starts beating far too fast and can't pump enough blood. And so he's been taken to the hospital, and he writes, "Next thing, I am out of my body. I'm up in the air, like 8 feet, looking down. I'm me. I have the same mind, and I'm looking around. I looked over to the left, and someone was there, like a friend, someone I knew for a long time. I did notice that time was all crazy. A second was an hour, and an hour was like a second. My overall thought was, wow, how cool. I looked into the hallway, and there were these paramedic guys there. There was a lady who I thought was the ambulance driver. They all looked really concerned, and I thought, wow, what's going on with them? Then I saw my partner. He was there in the hallway, and he looked so short compared to the paramedic guys. He looked horrified. I was thinking, why could they possibly be so upset? I see a hospital table down below and a guy on it. He has a beard. He kind of looks like me. Slowly, I realize it is me. It is me. At the same time, the person next to me sent the understanding, and I said at the same time, I'm dead. There were people working on me, and I'm sensing this big, bright light behind me. I know there is no roof or walls behind me, just like a big void. I could sense it, black on the outside with light in the middle. I feel great. I'm sensing there are all these people standing behind me, but I never turn around to see them. I can just feel them. I feel like who I was always supposed to be. Everything was so clear. I could see so well out of both eyes. I understood and felt what everyone in the room was thinking and feeling. Everything made sense to me. I saw myself, here he's talking about his body. I saw myself like some old clothes laying on the floor, and I really didn't want to put them back on. Okay, we'll continue with the reading in just a moment, but I wanted to just point out the wonderful correlation here with the Gita verse that Sri Krishna says, we discard our bodies like worn out garments. And this is exactly his experience, seeing his body, his dead body on the hospital gurney and feeling like it just looked like some old clothes laying on the floor, and he didn't want to put them back on. So he continues, I didn't really want to go back to my stupid life. Then I'm being pulled fast, backward and up and back into the air. Me on the table is disappearing way below. I felt absolute and total love and acceptance, unconditional. God, I guess, like nothing I have felt. I can't explain it. I just don't have the words. Then, in a second, I felt what everyone was feeling in the room. Adam, the doctors, the paramedics, and I felt all the students I have ever worked with in my life at the same time. He was a teacher. Now I am noticing that the me on the table, means his body, the me on the table is being held in the arms of some lady. And I stop moving backward and start moving back down towards me. She is holding me like a mother or something. I didn't believe in angels or Virgin Marys, but something like that. And the feeling was amazing. It just so touched me, and it moved me like nothing else ever has. Then I just thought, really ambivalently, whatever, I'll go back. The next second, I am slammed into my body, my eyes open, and I am hurting again. And then I pass out. So this is really a kind of a typical near-death experience report. It has quite a number of the elements that we discussed. And this idea of this out-of-body experience, seeing his body from above and not realizing that it's his body at first. This realization dawns on him. And I find it amusing in his language, this confusion between me when he says, well, me, I was on the table, but I was watching from above the table. So this confusion between who am I? Am I the body, or am I this being watching that body? Also, he had this experience of light, of meeting a guide of some kind, and experienced this unconditional love, this transformative experience of love, and a hyper awareness of others' feelings. So many such experiences, such near-death experiences, occur in emergency rooms and operating theaters, and when patients have cardiac arrest. Now, something about cardiac arrest that I didn't know, which is really interesting. Cardiac arrest means the heart stops pumping. When the heart stops pumping, the blood stops circulating through the body. And within, we know that when the heart stops pumping, the electrocardiogram, as they call it, the EKG or ECG, that line goes flat. That measures the electrical activity of the heart. And we know what flatliner means. Someone has died, their line has gone flat. Well, within 10 to 20 seconds, all the other organs of the body also stop functioning. Why? They're not receiving blood. They're not receiving any energy. So the brain, within 20 seconds in cardiac arrest, the brain also flatlines. The EEG, the electroencephalogram, shows no activity when when the blood stops circulating. Yet it is precisely at this time, when the brain is flatlined, that people are reporting these highly conscious experiences and float above their bodies and see the doctors working on them, working in a panic to restart their hearts. And they themselves feel utterly disconnected and at peace. So two important things. One, oftentimes what they see can be corroborated afterwards. So that provides strong evidence that it's not an imagination. And two, they're having a conscious experience when the brain is not functioning. Hence, consciousness is not dependent on the brain. I saw a question come in. I couldn't read the whole thing. If someone can keep it and read it out for me, or all right. Let me give a humorous example of this corroboration. A man had come in with cardiac arrest, and they were putting a tube into a breathing tube. And he was wearing dentures. So naturally, the nurse who was doing the work removed the dentures and placed them on the crash cart, the cart with all the equipment on it in the hospital, and put them in a drawer on the crash cart. Now, afterwards, the dentures were nowhere to be found. And but the man had seen from above what happened. So when this nurse came to see the patient a week later, as soon as he saw her, he told her, "Oh yes, but you know where my dentures are." And he could correctly say they're in the drawer on the cart. This is cited in near-death experience studies as the dentures case. It really gives very strong evidence that the experience was true. It wasn't a mere imagination. There's another fascinating case, the Pamela Reynolds case. And the reason it's remarkable is because her brain was actually, well, what happened is she had an aneurysm in her brain, which was just about to burst. And there's practically no hope of saving her. But in Arizona, there is a surgeon who was willing to try. And what they did is chilled her body down to 50 degrees centigrade. That's about 10 degrees, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 10 degrees centigrade. Stopped her heart, drained all the blood from the brain. And then with the blood out of the brain, they could easily remove the aneurysm and patch it up. And then warm her back, put the blood back in, warm her back up, and restart the heart. So they did this, and she lived for nearly 20 years after this surgery. She had a profound experience. During the surgery, her eyes were taped shut, and in her ears, there were earplugs, special earplugs emitting very loud clicking sounds. This was so that the surgeons could monitor her brain activity. When the sound would be perceived by the brain, there would be some electrical activity. So obviously the brain was entirely non-functional at this time. She had a vivid experience, was able to describe a number of things that she could not have known. For instance, she described the instrument which was used to cut open her skull. It's a certain kind of pneumatic saw. And she described it as looking kind of like an electric toothbrush. She had never seen one. And then she describes, she became aware of surgeons working around her groin. And she thought, how strange. I thought this was a brain surgery. What are they doing down there? Well, they were inserting the shunts, which take the blood to the heart-lung machine and bring it back to the body. And the surgeon, who was a woman, said, these veins are too small. And the head surgeon said, try the other side. And she heard this, and this was corroborated afterwards. And then she also saw the 2 defibrillation shocks that were administered to her at the end to restart her heart. So all these details were verified by the surgeons. After, she also had other elements in the experience. She went to an otherworldly light. She was met by her grandmother and an uncle, and it was her uncle who guided her back into her body and basically forced her to get back into it. She was not willing to get back into this dead body, and he pushed her back in. So these are these really very robust evidence that these experiences are true. However, of course, the skeptics will be skeptics. And it's one of the frustrating things in the field that there are skeptic scientists who will continue to explain away these things. It can't, because in their worldview, it's simply impossible that there could be any conscious experience without the brain. It's not possible. Hence, there must be some other explanation. Hence, it must be an oxygen-starved brain, or a hallucination, or a memory which is reconstructed afterwards. These explanations don't carry weight with the NDE researchers. Hypoxic experiences, that means of low oxygen, are disjointed and confused, whereas near-death experiences are coherent. Reconstructed memories. Researchers asked cardiac arrest patients if they'd had a conscious experience. Those who had a near-death experience could describe in great detail and very accurately everything that happened to them. Those who had not had the experience were asked to try to reconstruct what happened. None of them could do it. What happened next, where people were, they didn't know. They just tried to imagine it. They couldn't reconstruct the experiences. So this is what we're faced with, what Swamiji called the scientific potpourri, that there's the religious potpourri and there's also the scientific potpourri, that the scientists who are sure that we are right and there's no other way. We come across this again and again, the medical professionals who discount or even disparage these kinds of reports. And it's not entirely surprising, because the study of neurology has come quite a long way, and the neurologists have identified different parts of the brain which are involved in or correlated with different processes like memory, vision, movement, language, music, decision-making, all these things. They can identify different parts of the brain which are connected with these processes. And we can easily verify for ourselves. Drink a cup of coffee, I feel different. drink a bottle of scotch, I feel different in a different way, right? So these, clearly there is some connection between the brain and our general day-to-day conscious experience. The study of brain injuries also is it can be very eerie. Like there is a man who's part of the brain that's involved in making new memories was severely damaged, and he couldn't form new memories. All his old memories were perfectly intact, but he could form no new memories. So every time he would meet someone, it was like the first time after a long time. And so he'd meet his doctor, and, oh, doctor, I haven't seen you for so long. How are you? Then the doctor would go away. An hour later, doctor would come back. Oh, doctor, I haven't seen you for so. He couldn't form memories. So clearly, our personality, who we take ourselves to be, and our mental functions can be profoundly altered by drugs and diseases. And so sometimes it may seem that it's enough. The brain is enough explanation for our mind, for our memory, for our personality. Why believe in a soul? The brain is enough to explain who we are. The brain is enough to explain consciousness, which is merely a byproduct of chemical and electrical activity in the brain. How that happens, of course, is impossible to say. But all this, of course, the near-death experience research and reports shatter this myth that consciousness depends on the brain. Still, the question then arises, well, that may be, but what is the nature then of this connection between our minds and our bodies? Clearly, the near-death experience shows that the mental processes are possible without the support of a brain, and yet we see that they are circumscribed by the brain when we're in the body. What's the nature of that connection? What's the nature of this connection between us as a jiva, as an individual soul, and the body? What's the relation between the mind and the brain? So these are questions which don't have answers yet, but that's a fascinating area of study. The near-death experiences are actually very common, much more common than I could have imagined, and much more common, unless you know about this, than you would also imagine. I've spoken on this subject about more than half a dozen times, and every time after the talk, at least one person has come up to me and told me, I had a near-death experience. So I'm sure that someone in this meeting also, at least one of you, has had one, and maybe several of you. Not that I'm not asking you to identify yourselves, but they're very common. There's an estimate that about 5% of the population has had a near-death experience. And hearing them directly, especially when we hear them from someone who has had one, what always strikes me is the conviction of the experiencer that it was real. There's no doubt that this was a real experience and that it was a life-changing experience. And there are three main reasons why people don't talk about them. First, they're very hard to put into words. Second, since they're often met with disbelief, the people are reluctant to share them. And third, they're very private. They're sacred experiences. They're very intensely personal experiences. So thus far, we have touched on just really the tip of the iceberg of near-death experiences. And I think the best I can do right now is to read a few excerpts from other near-death experiences to give you a sense of the kinds of insights, the kinds of experiences people have. This is the kind of really to get more of a taste of the transcendent and mystical experiences people have. though the more profound these experiences, the more difficult they are to describe them. Anita Moorjani is a woman who wrote this from Singapore, wrote this fascinating and quite well-known book, Dying to Be Me. And I'll read a quote from this book. She's dying of cancer and she's separated from her body. As my emotions were being drawn away from my surroundings, I started to notice how I was continuing to expand, to fill every space, until there was no separation between me and everything else. I encompassed, no, became everything and everyone. I was fully aware of every word of the conversation that was taking place between my family and the doctors, although it was physically some distance away outside my room. I knew the frightened expression on my husband's face and could feel his fear. It was as though in that instant, I became him. Simultaneously, although I hadn't known of it previously, I became aware that my brother, Anup, was thousands of miles away on an airplane, anxiously coming to see me. This experience, by the way, was later corroborated. The conversations checked out. The conversations checked out. Her brother Anup was indeed on an airplane, all of that. She continued, there I was, without my body or any of my physical traits, yet my pure essence continued to exist. And it was not a reduced element of my whole self. In fact, it felt far greater and more intense and expansive than my physical being, magnificent. In fact, I felt eternal, as if I'd always existed and always would, without beginning or end. I was filled with the knowledge that I was simply magnificent. A beautiful realization. This is perfectly in sync with the Vedanta teachings. She felt eternal, as if she'd always existed, without beginning or end, anadyanandam, and filled with this knowledge that she was simply magnificent. Once our consciousness is freed from our body, from the limits of the physical instrument, it seems to be freed to experience this deeper level of our being as consciousness, as existence, as love, as joy. In this case, Anita had this glimpse of her eternal nature, always existing, always will be existing, filled with the knowledge of her own magnificence. We can think of Swami Vivekananda. Man stands on the glory of his own soul, the infinite, the eternal, the deathless. As this Maya veil becomes thinner and thinner, the inborn natural glory of the soul comes out and becomes more manifest. So this experience of Anita, her own magnificence. We are magnificent. That's the teaching of Vedanta. That's also what these people are experiencing. This experience is our destiny, that to experience our own magnificence, our own eternality. Try to touch briefly on a few of the other points. Some of the many experiences describe visiting other realms, heavenly realms, where they meet relatives, where it looks like Earth, but better, like a heaven, like we would imagine a heaven. And of course, Vedanta does not deny these realms. Our understanding is that they are not eternal, that we have to come back. So I'm not going to talk much about these. But the ones that are most exciting are the ones that people describe these profound realizations and the infinite love and unconditional love that completely transforms them. And one thing that is especially exciting about these, I think, is that they're experienced by ordinary people like you and me. These are not great saints who are reporting these experiences, not deep meditators. They're just ordinary people who have had profound, indescribable experiences of divinity, which completely transform their lives. And sometimes these reports really read like scripture. The after effects. Several things happen to experiencers of near-death experience afterwards. People lose completely their fear of death. They become more compassionate, more loving, more forgiving. They generally become more spiritually inclined, and often, very often, less religious, so-called religious. In fact, many very religious people doubt their experiences because they are not, these experiences are just tally perfectly with Vedanta, but they don't tally with all the theological doctrines of some of the other religions. So sometimes people say Orthodox Christians who don't see Jesus in their experience, well, they'll doubt the experience because they didn't see Jesus. But these people go beyond the limited conceptions of religion and realize that the divine is real, and that the conventional religious people, like some of us also, have a very limited conception of the divine. We're not established in God consciousness. And also another point that I should mention is that they don't become saints afterwards. People who have had these experiences, they don't become saints. They're still facing the difficulties of their lives. Many of them end up getting divorced. It's not necessarily that it's all roses afterwards. They have a hard, they may have a hard life. The experience so changes them that they can no longer get on with their spouses. It often takes years to integrate the experience into their lives. And here, what I think of is how Vedanta emphasizes preparation. We have to prepare ourselves for spiritual experience. We have to purify our minds. We have to detach ourselves and prepare ourselves for this profound experience of divinity. If we're thrown into it, it can be difficult to integrate, and we do see that. All right, I'm going to read another one. Annie, who died in a car accident. After seeing her body, she begins to rise, accompanied by a guide. As the extraordinary event unfolded, my escort and I ascended into the sky. Unconditional love became more concentrated. The awareness filled my inner consciousness with joy, comfort, and ecstasy. A blinding, magnetic, brilliant light focused on my forehead, drawing me closer and closer to the light that was beginning to encompass my whole being. Unconditional love intensely flowed everywhere, without effort, honoring and glorifying every cell with a total awareness of physically, emotionally, and mentally being within love at last. Every cell is gently caressed in the all-abundant love, honoring and glorifying every bit of who I am. Love that flowed without any conditions or effort, omnipresent and very real. The love abundantly flowed without any restrictions, conditions, or commitments. As we ascended, the clutches of the dramas that ego entertained disappeared. Ego's continual habit of self-sabotage was non-existent at last. The veil which separated me from experiencing the reality of unconditional love was effortlessly dissolved. Well, as Swami Vivekananda would put it, the adamantine wall that shuts us in is egoism. Until we give up the world manufactured by the ego, never can we enter the kingdom of heaven. This rascal ego must be obliterated. So here we find some of these people who have these experiences of egolessness and the incredible joy that comes from that. I think we should, I should try to wrap it up so we have some time for questions. Is it all right if we go a few minutes over? Those who like to stay on, because there's still a few points I'd like to mention because they're so wonderful and so fascinating. For instance, most reports do not name the light, the divine light, as a personal God, but rather as an impersonal. And some do affirm the idea that we hold so dear of different names for the one reality. One woman from Mexico who had an acute asthma attack, she saw the image of Jesus who looked like he did on the poster in her Sunday school class. You know, she was having this experience of infinite light, and then she saw the image of Jesus coming towards her, who looked like that poster on her in her Sunday school class. And she says, I had the thought that if I had been a Buddhist, perhaps he would look like Buddha. And I was told, that is right. God appears in a familiar form. So that's another woman who was raised in the Southern Baptist tradition. It's a very little, shall we say, a little bit narrow fundamentalist tradition. She experienced this radiant spirit being full of love, and she identified this being with Christ. But she also says others might have called him Buddha or Yahweh or Great Spirit in the sky, but the naming did not matter. Only the recognition of absolute love and truth was important. So this woman had such a powerful experience that let me read a little more of her experience in the last of it. There was no limit to the outpouring as I came to the rapturous awareness of the infinite nature of God's love. There was no place that God did not exist, and I was within God. I am an inseparable part of the light. The truth of who I am, indeed who we all are, is perfect love as a creation of God. All of God's creation is one creation, and I am one with creation. God and I are one. Finally, it all made sense. God could only love me because God is only love, nothing other than love. The only reality is God. There cannot be another, and God is love. What a realization. This woman coming from a very extremist religious tradition, in which she was taught a wrathful, vengeful God. And she had a deep fear of God and a deep fear of death, because what if I'm judged and sent to hell? So she was completely transformed by this experience. So she experienced the light, the divine, as separate from her, but also she merged with it. She felt that she and God were one. Many of these profound experiences emphasize this love, which to me I always feel that love is a reflection of Advaita in the realms of duality. And as Swami Vivekananda would put it, the practice of religion. How do we practice religion? Through this feeling of oneness that is love. So it's both the practice of religion, and it's also the culmination of religion. The direct experience of the divine is the experience of infinite love. Many of these experiencers, they find that they realize that the purpose of their life is to express love, to manifest love on earth. All right, briefly, a woman named Jill, who was thrown off of a motorcycle. She was riding on the back of a motorcycle, and it slipped on a patch of oil, and she was thrown from the cycle. And she describes a pool of liquid surrounding a divine presence. And This is fascinating. When I stepped into the liquid, all that was Jill disappeared. I no longer existed. And yet I was still there. I was the essence of life. I don't know what else to call it. I was conscious of my surroundings. I had joined with all the other consciousness in the pool and had become one with it. I knew all other life in the pool. I was one with everything. I was home. So this kind of experience is relatively rare among the near-death experiences, but we see that this starts to sound like the kinds of descriptions of non-dual realization. What does it mean when I no longer am me, and yet I exist? I am my true existence, my true glorious self, one with everything. I'll touch finally on the life review. And I think it makes more sense just to read this from a woman named Cami, who was crushed under a car, and see how she experiences all her actions and how her actions affected others, and how the web of karma that she describes in really poetic language. Here I could see the whole picture, how every thought and motivation of the previous life passage snaked tendrils of manifestation into the world, and how each tendril rolled out to affect other people and all of life. I felt everything, every little kindness, every subtle dig, each moment of carelessness, the wasted potentials, the comfort passed on to others, the secret joys, impatience, self-pity, a genuine smile to a lonely person at the right moment, ripples from a tossed pebble. I experienced how everyone experienced my actions and intentions, and how everyone they affected felt, and so on down the chain of action and reaction, flowing even into nature itself. More importantly, I could see how things could have been if enacted with pure love. Each action was balanced by its effect on the life force in total. The chain ran from my link back up, retracing and revealing why I made the choices I did, why my full intentions were not in alignment with my professed goals, saw the causes and effects through multiple lifetimes. It was as if the web of this incarnation was a soft silk, and we were holding it up to examine thread by thread, seeing how it draped in all directions from each point we lifted, seeing where the tensions ran through other layers and other lifetimes. With this review, there was no blame, no shaming, no rejections. So maybe that is enough to say about the past life review. It's fairly common. This is one of the most extensive descriptions of it, but it often is described that we can sense how our actions affected others from the other person's experience. We feel that the person is described feeling what that kid in 6th grade, when I spat on him, how he felt, or that lonely friend who, that late night call when I cheered him up, how he felt. Those kind of details, every detail is unfolded. So it's a really good reminder, if we can think about this, it's a really good reminder of how our actions affect others and how we're all interrelated. And let us therefore strive to act more and more from a place of love and respect with everyone in our lives. Return to the body. All the near-death experiences have returned to the body. Oftentimes they're pulled by children or relatives whom they feel still need them. And they can often see the trajectory of their families if they don't return. They can see how difficult their life would be if their children's lives would be if they didn't return. And as I mentioned, other times they are forced against their will to return. And leaving it can be very painful. A few last points I'd like to mention. Young children also often have near-death experiences, and often by drowning in swimming pools or ocean and those kind of things. It's extremely important to help young children process that and integrate it into their lives. It turns out that many children who have had, among the population of people who had near-death experiences as young children, suicide rate is much higher than the general population. They often have a lot of difficulty integrating it, especially when it's completely ignored by parents and family. Second, I would like to point out that people who have a near-death experience after committing suicide, attempting to commit suicide, do not try again. They realize that suicide is not suicide is not a way to get this experience. There are rare cases of people having negative experiences, hellish experiences. So please don't think that, well, my life is really difficult. This sounds great. I want not a near-death experience, but a full-death experience. So suicide is the path. No, suicide is not the path. We recognize that suicide is an extremely negative act, which negatively impacts the lives of so many people who are connected with the person who kills her or himself. So please don't do that. And I'd like to mention one humorous thing, one where we don't quite find that this tallies completely with the teachings of Vedanta. Sri Krishna is very clear in the Gita, and the Vedanta tradition is very clear that the last thought you have before death is extremely important. What we think at the very last moment determines our course, says Vedanta. Here, we don't find the near-death experiences really bear that out. Mostly people are not, who are dying of heart attacks and accidents, they're not thinking of God. And yet they're having profound experiences. And there's one very to me, very humorous. A man was shot, but it was a case of mistaken identity, and a criminal thought he was another criminal who had swindled him, and he shot him. And as he was dying, he saw on the sole of his shoe some bubble gum stuck on the sole of his shoe, and he was wondering if the bubble gum had stained the new carpet, the carpet on the floor of his new car. And then right after that, he's drawn into the light and has a profound experience. So this actually is very encouraging, that even the man who is thinking of bubble gum right at the moment of death, he's drawn into the light. So I thought I'd like to mention that. So there are, aside from the near-death experiences, people who actually die, there are also people who have very similar experiences, indistinguishable experiences, who don't actually die. They may only be terrified of dying. People who are about to get into a car accident and report similar experiences, and then somehow the accident doesn't happen, and they're untouched, and yet they had a similar kind of profound experience. Or sometimes for inexplicable reasons, or someone who's meditating who has a very similar experience. So this is very encouraging for us, because Vedanta always says we don't have to wait for death to experience the divine. We don't have to wait for death to experience our own magnificence, our own glory, to know that we are none other than infinite consciousness and bliss. We can experience it in this life. And so the near-death experience reports are very encouraging in that they verify the teachings of Vedanta, I feel. But also, we don't have to die. We can experience it here and now. So perhaps I've spoken for maybe just over an hour. I will be happy to address or try to address any questions or conversation. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share these things, and I thank Swami Sarvapriyananda for suggesting this topic, because I always love coming back to it. And I also would encourage you to check out, there are two websites, the one from the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, and the other from the International Association in IANDS, International Association of Near-Death Study, or something like that, near-death studies, that have a lot of these reports stored, archived on their websites.
Swamiji, there are a few questions in the chat. Would you like me to read them, or you're able to?
Yeah, please, because my computer wasn't connecting well, so I've connected on my phone. So unfortunately, I only see 3 of you on my screen, and it's very difficult to see the chat. So if you can read them, I don't even know how many people are in the call with us.
Okay. So Maharaj, the first question
47.
is from Neelam. Pranam Swamiji, can you please relate to a NDE of Ajmil in Bhagavatam? He sees and hears conversation of Yamadutas and Narayan Parshadas.
Okay, now I have to confess my ignorance of the actual scriptural reference. But people do, there are so many different, people do experience, in some cases, going, as it were, to some kind of gatekeeper who says, what are you doing here? It's not your time, go back. So is it something like that?
Pranam Swamiji, I would like to bring this to your attention. It is written in Bhagavatam that there is a character called Ajamil.
Ajamil, yes.
Ajamil is very sinful. He was a Brahmin, but he was very sinful. He was polygamous. He was going to prostitutes, cheating people, lying. But only good thing happened is he kept his son's name Narayan.
Right.
And
on
he
his deathbed,
his only son Narayan. So when he was dying, he was so fearful that he chanted the name Narayan, calling his son. And it says in Bhagavatam that Yamadutas came, and so did Narayan Parshadas came. And they both were debating. And Yamadutas said, we will take him. And Narayan Parshadas said, no, we will take him, but you can't take him. His time is not due yet. And he's listening to all this conversation, just like NDE. And then what happens is the Yamadutas leave him alone, and then he changes his life. He becomes very religious. He becomes saintly. He goes to religious place. He prays God, and he attends Nirvana. So this is a detailed story in Bhagavatam. So it is exactly NDE expressed in detail. I just made it a very short summary, but there is a details written all over in Bhagavatam.
Yes, wonderful. I'm familiar only with the very basic detail that his son was named Narayan and he calls him like that. That's wonderful. That sounds like, it does sound like an NDE, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's a great reference. I'll have to look at that more closely.
Yeah, I thought that would be good for your. First thing, I must admit, it was a wonderful lecture. I am a cardiologist myself, and I really understand how detailed you have studied ventricular tachycardia and CPR and everything, which is part of my routine,
Right.
And I like to share 2 more stories. I had a medical student who was atheist, and when I was teaching medical students, I used to talk about Hinduism, Vedanta, and I said soul is immortal, etc. And this student laughed at me and said, there is nothing like a soul. Of course, he was a medical student. He became a doctor. He became a venerologist and a very profound teacher. And so I went to a lecture, and he was a teacher there at that time, giving lecture. So he said, Dr. Balotkar, I know you. You are my teacher. And he pulls me out after the lecture and says, listen, I admit there is a soul. So I said, what happened to you? And he said, well, I had a cardiac arrest. And his guy was around 25, 30, who was completely atheist. And he said, I had a cardiac arrest, and I could see my body going up. The ambulance drivers are doing CPR to me, starting intravenous lines, jumping on my chest. And I could see I went up and up and up. And then the angels, of course, he was Christian, even though he was an atheist. The angel said, your time is not due yet. I'm going to put you back down. And He came down. Of course, he was giving a lecture after that. So that was an experience that he did. Recently,
Yeah.
my friend, who is also a cardiologist, and I am a classmate of his we are friends around 50 years now. He's also a cardiologist. He died almost near-death experience. He's highly spiritual. He went up, 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 and he saw everything what was happening in the intensive care unit. And he felt the God told him, your time is not due. I want you to do more work. He's a Jain. So I need you to do more work about what you're doing for Jainism. And he came down, and he's totally fearless, what you said. He's totally fearless of death. And he has devoted his life completely to Jain scriptures and Jain knowledge spreading, etc. And he has also expressed this near-death experience in detail to me, you know. So I really enjoyed your lecture and such a detailed study. Thank you very much.
Yes, that conviction is unshakable. Those who have experienced it, they don't have any doubts. We and the skeptics may doubt, but those who have the experience, they don't doubt. That's also one of the proofs of spiritual experience in Vedanta. Does it transform your life? Do you have any doubt? If you don't have doubt, then it's a genuine experience.
I have one more comment. I think you mentioned that Lord Krishna says in Gita, Antakale yathamati sagati. So that means if you are remembering God, you reach the God. But we don't know. All these NDE people are not necessarily religious. Could it be that people who are religious, saintly, and remembering God at the time of death, they don't come back and to tell us about NDE? They attain God.
Good point. That's a nice thought. Who knows that? All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really loved it. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Swamiji, the next question is from Rema. Pranam Swamiji, can you please explain how they get to see their deceased relatives? Because once the body is shed, the mind moves on to new bodies. How can they be seen as their old selves?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think a lot of it, we have to say we don't really know. But at the same time, the idea of reincarnation, it doesn't mean that we immediately reincarnate. The general idea is that after life, we may reap the fruits of our karma in some kind of swarga lok, some kind of heavenly realm. And time, again and again, these experiences talk about how time is different once outside the body. And so what seems like 100 years to us here may feel like 5 minutes of there, and vice versa. So it seems that perhaps the relatives, they're incorporeal, they don't have physical bodies, but they can manifest the bodies to appear familiar to people who are having the experiences. But this is an additional kind of corroboration of the validity of near-death experiences, that some people who meet relatives whom they didn't know they had. Meeting a lady, say, a young boy was talking about a lady who came. Then one day he was shown the photograph of his grandmother who had died before he was born. And he said, that's the lady I saw. So yes, our ancestors often do maintain some connection with the form they had while on Earth, though often they're described as looking younger than they were when they died. Another fascinating thing is sometimes people meet someone who has recently died, who they weren't told. Say I die and I meet my uncle, and I come back and I say, hey, I didn't know my uncle had died. And oh yes, we didn't tell you, we didn't want to upset you, your uncle had died yesterday. So that's another evidence of the validity of these experiences.
Next question is from Girish. How long after death would consciousness retain the sense of I-ness or ego? Would you speculate? And then he says, surely it would not persist eternally.
Right. Eternal. It doesn't persist eternally, but apparently it persists a long time because we keep coming back. And that's the ideal of Vedanta, of moksha, of realizing that even this individual self is ultimately illusory. However, I'm not willing to say, because even time doesn't make sense. We also have the faith, or we feel that the grace of the divine is also there. That means we don't necessarily have to be born again, that by divine grace, that limited individuality with which we are identified gradually merges in the infinite light of the divine. And we read a little bit from a couple of experiences that seem to hint at that kind of experience, even in the NDE. But moksha, of course, from the dualistic perspective, there's no merging, dissolving of the individual ego. We remain as eternal servants of the divine. So there's other options. If you don't want to merge in the divine, you can remain as the eternal servant of the Lord. That's also permitted. But since this is the New York Center, which is intimately connected with Swami Sarvapriyananda's teachings on Advaita, generally from that standpoint, we would say that ultimately the individual I melts away, and that is when we gain our true individuality. As Swami Vivekananda would say, you are not individuals yet. But I would not be able to say more about it.
Next question is from Rama. Swamiji, Pranam. Many of these experiences felt like breakthrough of realization of Advaitic knowledge. Does this mean that during the moments of death, do all of us get these breakthroughs? If so, why are we coming back?
Great question. Well, I have read from some of the most profound and most inspiring accounts. Not all, all of them are inspiring, but not all of them are have these profound realizations of non-duality like that. Yeah, these questions are difficult to answer. Why do we come back? There's karma. We're drawn by our karma. Or some people suggest that in some of these experiences, they suggest that they had a contract to fulfill before coming. And until so in a sense, the idea that we agree to come and we agree to do certain things, and then we promptly forget all about it. But how long we will keep coming back? Those who come to Sri Ramakrishna, we think that by Sri Ramakrishna's grace, perhaps we need not come back. But at the same time, we strive in this life itself to realize our true nature. We make progress. And that brings to my mind the Tibetan Buddhist practice. The Tibetan Buddhists place great emphasis on the moment of death, because they say at that moment we have a brief window of opportunity when we can realize our true nature, so they practice for that. And so these near-death experiences also seem to hint at that in those first moments of death, they have these profound experiences. And what happens after that, we don't know. If they go to cross that boundary and don't come back, we don't know if they end up in a particular heavenly realm, or they are called back to be reborn soon. That's still the mystery. But we know that we don't cease to exist. And the near-death experiences, for the most part, suggest that whatever is to be our path after death is going to be pretty good. It's going to be it's an experience most often of love, of deep interconnectedness, of peace, of joy.
So Swamiji, it's Diane here again. This has been wonderful, and we are so grateful for you taking the time to talk to us today on such a intriguing subject. I'm sure we've all got a lot to think about, and hopefully we can see you again very soon. And again, namaskar. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. I always feel like I benefit so much from reading these things and sharing these things. And I hope that sometime soon we'll be able to meet in person.
Yes, I hope
and,
so. Yeah.
Let me close with a chant.
Thank you.
Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityormamritangamaya aviravirma idhi rudrayate dakshinam mukham tena mam pahi nityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om, peace, peace, peace.